Hello, welcome to week 11 lecture 51. Today I will talk about language documentation. In the last classes I talked about language endangerment and I mentioned how language documentation can actually save a language from getting endangered or can help in revitalizing a dead language. So let us know what it is about. So language endangerment we have already discussed. Today we will discuss what is language documentation. We will also talk about the targets of language documentation, outputs of language documentation. So what can be the different outputs of language documentation? What we consider as good documentation corpus and the process of data elicitation, and then different methods related to data elicitation like translation method. There are different methods, but today I will only talk about translation method. So what is language documentation? Language documentation is a lasting multi-purpose record of a language. So both the points lasting and multi-purpose and record, actually all these three are very important. Lasting means when a language is being documented, whatever has been documented should be there, it should be lasting, it should be preserved in such a way that it stays for a long time, it should not get lost. And it has to be multi-purpose, it can be used by different disciplines like anthropologists, they can use it, someone building language technology with the help of it, that can be possible. Moreover, a detailed analysis of a language can be possible. So, it should be multi-purpose, it can be used and it is a record. So, everything has to be recorded in a proper way. He identifies the following as important features of documentation. Himmelmann actually identifies these following. So, he focuses on the primary data. So, when we talk about language documentation, we generally talk about primary data. There can be certain part of secondary data, but when we talk about language documentation, we are generally talking about endangered or vulnerable languages. So, when the language is endangered, then generally we do not have much documented materials. So, there is no scope for collecting secondary data. That is why he focuses on primary data, and that is a difference from corpus building. In corpus we can take data from secondary sources, from primary sources, from both the sources, but in language documentation our focus is on primary data. Then one has to be accountable for the data. If I am collecting the data, I should be accountable for that. It is not that I do not know, I have collected something or I have manipulated the data, it is not fair. I have to be accountable for that, and it has to be explicit concern for accountability, which means that if I have collected the data, my details are recorded along with the data. That comes under metadata, which I will talk about in the next class. So, accountability shows that my details about my field, my name, everything has to be recorded, so that I am accountable for it, I am responsible for whatever I have collected. Concern for long term storage and preservation of primary data. So, if there is a project for language documentation, it does not end on collecting the data, it has to be concerned about keeping it or preserving it for longer period of time. So, the storage has to be in way that the data can be preserved for a longer period of time and can be retrieved whenever needed. So, preservation does not only mean that it will be kept somewhere locked, and if someone needs it can't be used. No, rather it has to be preserved well, and at the same time it can be retrieved easily. If one wants to work on the data, one can do it, and the data should be like that it can be used by different disciplines or by interdisciplinary teams. So, as I mentioned, if someone wants to use or develop language technology using the data, the team should be possible, it should be possible for the team to do that. If someone wants to create pedagogical materials, one should do it by using the data. So, the data should be accessible and also can be used by everyone, can be used by interdisciplinary teams. It should not be like that only linguists can use it, it should be approachable. So, targets of language documentation is linguistic practices and traditions. So, what we need to collect, what should we aim in language documentation? We should aim to collect linguistic practices and traditions. So, by practices we mean of course the day to day discourse, how people talk, and the tradition is every language has its own traditions or own conventions. So, in certain languages when we meet we say good morning, but in certain languages we do not say that. In some other languages when people meet they ask, have you eaten food? And I am not making this up, there are languages where people do say, have you eaten your breakfast, have you eaten your food? So, that is the way to greet actually. In other languages people just say, are you good? And the other person can just say good. So, these are different ways to greet each other. So, it is not necessary that all the communities, all the linguistic communities will follow a same way of greeting each other. These are parts of the conventions. So, when we are aiming to document a language, we also need to document those, we need to focus on those as well. Not only about the sentence structures and all, but also about these traditions and conventions. Also the meta-linguistic knowledge of those practices. What do I mean by meta-linguistic knowledge? There are certain things which actually goes beyond the language, certain practices which are beyond the language. So, if someone is saying just good, if someone is meeting someone in a marketplace and just saying good, what does that mean? For those community members it just means that are you good, are you fine, and the other person says good. So, actually these two people are saying the same word good, good, both of them, but that is a way of saying are you fine, that is a way of asking are you good, are you fine, and then the other person is replying yes I am fine. But they do not need to utter the whole sentence, they can just say the same word good and good. So, one is actually asking are you fine, are you good, and the other person is replying yes I am good, but both of them are actually using the same word with different intonations. So, now this is actually meta-linguistic knowledge. This, because if you translate the word good, so bhalo, bhalo maybe in Bangla. So, bhalo word you can translate in English and you can say good, but that will not give you the meaning of this discourse which happens in the marketplace between the two friends maybe. So, you need to know beyond that, you need to know beyond the meaning of the word bhalo. You need to know why in this particular context only one word is enough, they do not need to utter the whole sentence. What does this one word actually means in the given scenario? So, all those things are part of meta-linguistic knowledge, because the language is not giving us that information, language is only giving us one word which means good. But looking at the practice, looking at the convention, we know that it means more than a word. It actually means it is a way of greeting each other, it is about asking someone whether that person is fine or not. So, everything, all this information is part of meta-linguistic knowledge and those practices. So, all these has to be collected and recorded in a systematic manner. So, language documentation targets to document linguistic practices, meta-linguistic practices, and how does it try to document it? Through systematic recording, and then the recordings are transcribed. It has to be transcribed, the recordings are not kept like that, they have to be transcribed in IPA and then translated and analyzed. So, there has to be also translations, they are properly glossed, translated, and then there is the analysis of that. So, all of these process is actually part of language documentation. So, linguistic and metalinguistic data are stored for future study. When their language documentation, when we have one language being documented and the materials are there, then these information which is collected, the linguistic and the metalinguistic analysis, along with the data and the transcription and the translation, everything has to be stored in such a way that it can be used in the future studies. So, one may write a grammar based on that, one may create anything based on that. And language documentation is very interdisciplinary in nature. It is not only linguists working for that, actually people from different disciplines work together as a team for documenting a language. Language documentation can produce dictionaries, grammars, teaching tools, a collection of folklores, language technology related material, and language documentation can also help in revitalizing a dead language. If a language has already died, again to teach the language materials from language documentation can be used. So, language documentation can actually help in revitalization. And we have actually seen how grammar can be used, can be created through documented materials. So, the grammar of Akabea by Comrie and Zomponi was actually written. It is the first grammar of a traditional Great Andamanese language written according to current linguistic standards, like the way the grammars are written. Based on a comprehensive study of all extant sources from the period when Akabea was spoken. So, now Akabea is not spoken, but still Comrie and Zomponi wrote the grammar of Akabea. How was it possible? It was possible because of the documented materials. The materials were available. Akabea died out in 1920s. So, now no one speaks the language, but there was documented materials. The language was documented in 19th century by two British administrators. So, they actually documented the language and those materials were available, and based on that the grammar was written recently. So, and those administrators who actually collected the data or who documented this language were neither a trained linguist nor their material had a reliable analysis of the grammar, especially for the morphology and the syntax. But then these two linguists later on they worked on the data and they created the modern grammar out of it, which actually helps us in understanding about the history and prehistorical inhabitants of Andaman Islands. So, we know better about them with the grammar, because the grammar is not only about sentence structures or collection of words, it can again tell us about how the speakers used to perceive the world. So, it also grammar can tell us about the perception, how the community members perceive the world. So, we see that we have examples where a grammar of a dead language is written by using the documented materials. So, if we have the documented materials, that can help us in creating lots of things, including writing grammar. So, what do we mean by good documentation corpus? Woodbury explains that good documentation corpus should be diverse in nature. So, containing samples of language use across a range of genres and social cultural context, including elicited data. So, there has to be different genres and from different domains, it has to be diverse. So, one can't just collect say data of agriculture, science or technology or anything one particular domain. No, in language documentation we try to include more and more domains. Actually, the whole community has to be documented. Every linguistic practice is aimed to be documented, though it might not be possible, but yet the aim is that. It has to be large, it has to be huge, and of course, when I say that every linguistic practice has to be documented, then one might fall, one might get very attracted to collect data through unethical means, but then that is not correct. One has to collect data or document a language through ethical measures. So, language documentation corpus related to language documentation should be diverse, large and also ethical. It should not be derived through unethical means. So, a major portion of language documentation is done through data elicitation. In the beginning of the fieldwork, the researcher has to rely on the elicitation. Elicitation means getting linguistic data from the native speakers by asking different types of questions. So, many fieldwork manuals give advice on what kind of questions to ask or what not to ask, how to make interview interesting, how to keep informant attentive and all those things. But actually for different speech communities different tactics work. So, every time the same rules or same advice can't help you. Different fields or different language communities have their own notions, and depending on the notion, depending on their practices, one has to modify themselves for collecting data. So, different methods those are followed in elicitation are translation method, narration, observation, picture book method, video method, object naming method, discussion method and interview method. Today I will only talk about translation method. So, in translation method, as the name suggests, you carry a list of words or you carry different types of sentences in any of the language which the target language users understand. So, maybe if you are collecting data for say any language like Coda, so they understand Bangla. So, you carry the questionnaire in Bangla and then ask them to translate those words, those sentences. So, you have a list of sentence, you have a list of words and you ask the native speakers to translate those. So, that is basically the translation method. So, it is for collecting the words, it is important collecting the words, because for phonological description it is important to collect the words in isolation. For creating dictionaries, for creating primers, these are very helpful. So, when one starts working in a field or when one starts collecting data, one generally starts with the basic word list. So, because collecting words are also important, there are different types of word lists available. One of the most famous one is the Swadesh list, which is very commonly used, which has 100 basic words which are present in almost all the languages of the world, and generally a linguist begins with that. So, but then so there are certain problems with the list, I will talk about that. So, when we talk about a word list, we generally see that word lists are based or designed based on semantic domain. So, by semantic domain we mean words of closer meanings, they are of particular domain, one domain, they have closeness in their meanings. So, maybe one domain can be human beings and stages of life. So, it will carry words like man, woman, child, middle aged man, old woman, so words like that. We can have different domains like physical environment, animals, domestic animals, wild animals. So, within one domain also one can have different type of subdomains and all those. So, one can have body part as a domain and then below it one can have only the parts of the face and so on, or internal body parts and external body parts. So, things like that. So, that way the words are categorized. Why is it important to have a semantic domain? Because when you are asking someone to name or translate a word in for a particular word, you are saying what do you call eye in your language, or what do you call nose in your language. And then suddenly if you talk about something very different, like what do you call a bird or what do you call rice, then that is difficult for the speakers to recollect. But if you ask something related to nose, like what do you call your tongue, what do you call your ear, then it is easier for the native speakers to give you the words. And that is why when we design questionnaires, we always follow the semantic domain. So, same type of words are kept together, same in the sense of meaning. So, if we are talking about body parts, we can also talk about different, we are talking about, for example, leg. We can talk about the ornaments related to leg, maybe anklet, toe ring and all those things, or tattoos related to body parts. So, related things are kept together. Now, language experts are asked to translate the given words and sentences. There is one advantage to that. You know how to begin. So, you are in the field, you do not know the language, you do not understand the language, but you are there to collect data. When you give them a sentence and they translate it for you, you know what they are saying. So, that is helpful, that is that proves very convenient. So, how to begin? You don't need to actually learn the language before beginning your work. You can start your work. Again, translation method helps you for a planned data. You can easily plan your thing. I will collect words in 2 days, then I will collect simple sentences, I will collect sentences with negations and all those things. So, you can plan out your work. And you can get more and more data in lesser amount of time. So, you have say like 1000 words list, and then you sit for 2 and 3 days, you get those 1000 words in that language. So, it saves time, and then it is less messy. It is easy to clean and arrange the data because you know the meanings, you have the translations with you. So, it is easier to clean and work on that data. But then there are certain disadvantages. So, when you already have a word list, you may not have the words reflecting the local environments. So, you have words which they are saying that is okay, but then you might see flowers or fruits which are part of that geography, which you totally may miss out because you do not have that in your list, you did not knew about that. Secondly, when I talked about Swadesh word list, I said that there is a problem with it. So, what is the problem with that also? There are certain words in that and also in the other word list which are not part of many of the cultures. So, people do not know, they do not have words for those things. So, in those cases what can be done? It becomes difficult, and again in the Swadesh word list there are certain functional words. So, these functional words are again difficult to translate. So, if I ask you translate something like and, the, so these will be very difficult for you to do. So, functional words are very difficult to collect through translation method, and there you can have certain names of birds, certain names of vegetables in your translation word list which the community members do not have, they do not know about it. So, you will not get the data for that. At times this translation method can make the native speakers embarrassed when the translation of a word they do not understand. So, you are asking them, maybe they have a word in their language for that particular word, but then they do not know in their link language that you are using. So, like I gave you the example of Coda, I am collecting data in Bangla from Coda speakers. So, Coda speakers they may not know this word in Bangla. So, they do not understand what I am asking, what I am looking for. So, either I get a wrong data, so they gave me some other word because they could not understand or wrongly understood it, or they can't say it because they do not understand the link language. Word that they cannot translate because either they have forgotten it, because mostly language documentation we work with endangered languages. So, maybe those terms have been forgotten, or maybe there is a taboo about it. So, it is okay for us to talk about that particular thing, but not okay for them to talk about it. So, it is a taboo, so they might feel embarrassed. So, there are these advantages related to translation methods. So, when one is actually using translation method, one feels these are some of the limitations, and that is why nowadays we see not only translation method is used, lots of different other methods are also used along with translation method. Translation method, as I mentioned, is good to start with. One can start with translation method, but then afterwards one can shift to other methods as well. And when we talk about language documentation, of course, only sticking to translation method can never help us, because it will not give us different data from different domains. Like we also need to collect folklores, we need to collect folk songs, all of these can't be collected through translation method, because every community has its own folklore, every community has its own folk songs. So, you can't ask them to translate those, and that is why we see other methods are also used along with translation methods, which I will talk about in the next class. So, in this example you can see that Koda is a community which mainly worships sun as their god. So, while the sun is the main or the head god, the nature is perceived to be different forms of this god. So, this is a total different perception. They are looking at sun as a god who is actually regulating the other forms of nature which are also part of god. So, there is this head god and other gods. So, the word for god is Bonga, which is also the word for sun. So, if I want to get two different words for the word god and for the word sun, I will not get that, because one word is used for both. The seasons are also referred as Bonga. So, there can be different name of a season which is which takes this compounding with Bonga to show that this is spring god, this is summer god. So, this concept of god or this semantic range of god is very wide than the word god itself. So, we can't have a direct translation in English. If I say god, Bonga means god, then I am not doing justice with the word Bonga, because it means beyond that. It has a relation with the nature. It is not only god, not only the concept of god, but also the concept of nature. Both the concept of god and nature is mixed together, has become one somewhere, and that is very difficult to translate. Every house has its own god. That god is also referred as Bonga. So, it is Ara Bonga, and now this Ara Bonga is not directly related to sun, but then also the Bonga word is used. So, that is one difficult task to translate, and then we see there are different local environment related terms. There are different words which talks about the local environment. So, in the link language, the language which I am using to translate, maybe I do not have words in that language for those terms. Like for the words, there are different words for pond in Kurmali, and Kurmali is spoken in Purulia along with other districts and other states. In Purulia, Kurmali, we see that this area is very dry, and they have different types of ponds and rivers, but they also get dried out in the summer, and that is why they have a different word for that, which mentions or which refers to the river that has no water in summer. In rainy season, in winter it will have water, but in summers water dries out from these rivers. So, there is a different word for that. But in the language in which I was collecting data, I could not find any word for that, or in English also I can't find one word for that. So, I have to use the explanation. So, if I only go to the field with only one word like pond, river, lake, what do you call pond, what do you call river, what do you call lake, then I will get the terms for these, but I will miss out on the word which shows river without water in it in summer. I will not get this word. But when I am talking about language documentation, I need to document that as well, and that is actually important part of the language. So, that was about today's class, and I hope you enjoyed it. These are some of the suggested readings. Thank you.